is Luca.
Yes.
Nice to meet you. Okay. Here we go. Does everybody in the room hear me? Does everybody online hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, well, welcome to Mistral and the second public program, where we'll be discussing the queerness in everyday life through the notion of collecting and archiving. My name is Huip van der Werf, that's Radna Rumping. Together we run Mistral. Today's talk, before I introduce our guests, today's talk is, so we had a film evening 2 nights ago, which was, as far as I'm concerned, a hit because it was an incredibly entertaining film, but also very insightful. The introduction that we had beforehand offered a lot of, offered a very good framework in which to understand, I think, some of the issues that we can speak about today as well. We'll come back to that when the film becomes part of the presentation. What we'll be getting into now and what the interest is in the subject of the everyday life is the collection of Luca here at Mistral. This is the last week of the show, which is why we're having these public programs. When I met Luca 3 years ago, what captivated me about this collection of his was that it wasn't just explicitly political. It wasn't just explicitly referencing cultural movements. It didn't have this kind of specificity. Many of the things in his collection are indeed everyday objects, such as we have here: matchbooks, buttons, merchandising, magazines, postcards, book covers. Often these seemingly fleeting, or in some cases for some people perhaps even irrelevant, sort of iconographies, illustrative qualities, they say a lot, and with time that meaning also changes. And what we find most interesting here at Mistral is the relationship between the objects. What does a button mean with a specific message in relationship to a postcard 50 years previous, in relationship to a book cover 20 years later? There are meanings to be made here. This constellational meaning is what interests us here at Mistral very much, and why the everyday life, I think, is an important way of delving into that, and especially through the notion of archives and collections. So that's setting up what and how what we'll be speaking about. How we're going to be speaking about it, I hope, just works, because I have to admit, technology is an incredible pain in the ass. Everybody here in the space can see everybody online in this meeting. I'm just crossing my fingers that the sound's going to work. At least they can hear us. That's great. Today's speakers, so here in the space behind the table, Luca Locati Luciani himself. Next to him, Andrea Meroni. The two of them have written a book on the film that we screened the previous evening, Splendore e Misere di Madame Royale. The book you can see on the table in the back, and for those of you who speak and read Italian, can also purchase one if you wish. Again, we'll be going into the movie a little bit later. What we'll be beginning with is 3 presentations. The first one will be Luca himself, and we'll be showing some objects from the collection. Some of those objects are here in the space at hand, some of them not. After that, Sara de Giovanni will be speaking about the collection. Oh God, where are my notes? Shit.
There you go.
There I go. Sara, I'm very sorry if you will have to introduce
In
yourself.
Bologna, Cassero.
Oh, no, Bologna I remembered, but I didn't want to mention the archive in the wrong name.
Centro di documentazione Flavia Madaschi in Bologna.
Grazie, grazie mille. And at least now we know that the sound works also. Should we turn it up a little? Would you mind to say it again, Sara?
Okay, I'm from Bologna and I represent here the Centro di Documentazione, the Library and Archive of Cassero LGBTI Center of Bologna. And is titled to Flavia Madaschi. That's an activist from an Italian association.
Thank you very much. Gerard, would you mind to introduce yourself then, so I don't make any mistakes? Thank you.
Certainly, Gerard Koskovich from San Francisco. I'm a longtime collector, an antiquarian dealer in LGBTQ materials, and have been actively involved in organizing queer archives, libraries, and museums for more than 40 years. I'm a founding member of the GLBT Historical Society Museum and Archives here in San Francisco, which was created in 1985.
Thank you very much. These will be the three slightly succinct presentations, 15 to 20 minutes each. And then after that, we'll be engaging in a conversation, which again, it seems will probably work, given that the sound and the video and all that is working out, so that audience members also have the opportunity to ask questions. Things at Mistral, as you may have noticed, are usually quite informal. We like to keep it that way, so feel free just to throw up a hand, shout out something, and there's a microphone there that definitely works. Yeah? Should we mute it? The recording is on. I'm sorry, that's right, Radna. This conversation is being recorded. So for anyone, well, I suppose draw your own conclusions from that, but it will be recorded with your permission. Thank you. So without further ado, Luca, would you like to begin? And shall I show your first slide already?
Okay, for sure, for sure. So I introduce myself. I am Luca Locati Luciani, and I am collecting LGBTQ plus material since now 20 years ago. I started as a private collector, and but my idea since the beginning was not just to take my collection for myself, but to help everyone who needed this kind of material for research, books, or exhibitions, because I always have thought that collecting for myself was something that I didn't like so much, and it was a cold thing for me. Then from this August, I changed also my collection from a collection to a public archive. Now it has a name also, not in my name, naturally. The archive is named upon Aldo Mieli, which has not to be confused with Mario Mieli. Mario Mieli is a famous queer activist, Italian queer activist that was has wrote this book, The Elementi di critica omosessuale, which is very famous in Italy and but translated in English and in Spanish too in 1977. Aldo Mieli is a different person. Aldo Mieli was a pioneer in the homosexual, at that age we have to talk homosexual liberation movement in the 1920s in Italy. And he founded one magazine. The name was Rassegna di Studi Sessuali, which was one of the first magazine in Italy to talk about LGBT subject in a modern way, similar to other magazine, Liberation magazine in Germany, for example. So for me, it was important to revive the name of this person that also in Italy not always is known. So I decided to name the archive upon Aldo Mieli. Then I think that we can go to the slide. And the first image that you see is a flyer from the El Dorado Club. El Dorado Club was one of the most important LGBT clubs in the world in the 1920s until 1932. We have also not to talk about only one club, because El Dorado had quite a history with many addresses. The first El Dorado was an El Dorado DL that was in Berlin in Alte Jakobstrasse, and it was founded in 1919. Then after, it was opened an El Dorado in Kantstrasse in 1922. Some year after, the same owner of the Kantstrasse El Dorado opened another bigger one in oh my God, now I don't remember the name of the Strasse, Lutherstrasse. And after 1 year, in 1928, he opened another El Dorado in the Schöneberg area in Motzstrasse. So, as you see, there were many El Dorado. After the Wall Street crisis of 1929, there were some economical problems also to clubs. So the first El Dorado to close was the Lutherstrasse El Dorado. Then after, in 1931, there was a law made by the chief of police in Berlin that made all the clubs in Berlin close at 10 in the evening. So this gave a lot of other economical problems to the clubs. And the El Dorado owner rented the space in 1932 to the SA, so the Nazi military group, because Roem of the SA was a customer of the El Dorado also. And after, this is why you can see sometime a photograph with the El Dorado and the Nazi sign over the El Dorado. And some people think that this happened after the Nazi came to power. But no, this happened before, and the El Dorado was used as a place, a office for the elections of 1933. So, and in 1933, as many of you maybe know, there were made some laws that closed also the other queer clubs in Berlin, and the history, you know, is not so happy after. So for me, it's important to save this kind of material, flyers, small merchandising from clubs, from bars, because these are the kind of items that people generally throw away. So a part of our history sometimes is difficult to reconstruct, to rebuild, to is difficult to make research on some part of our history, especially on the everyday life. It's more simple to make research, for example, on literature, on magazines, because are published material and are more easy to find. And so there are more research on these kind of materials. The other image I have put is of the Stonewall Inn, but is not the Stonewall Inn that all of you know. Was the previous Stonewall Inn. Oh, okay, you can go, okay, to the matchbook. Perfect. This was a matchbook, so used with inside the match to fire for the fire, no? And this is another kind of interesting material, especially about clubs, about bars, because when some of these places did not make flyers, for example, to remember the place, the only way was to know the clubs if you like, if you were told by some friends, or maybe if you take a matchbook box and you have the address in the matchbook box and you know where the place was. Is a sort of flyer, but it is not a flyer. And I have like thousands of these matchbooks because many of the clubs that have their name in this object have no other kind of material related to them. There are no flyers, no other kind of material. Naturally, there are also clubs that made matchbook and flyers, but many have only the matchbook to remember. Then you can go straight. Oh, okay, this is also of El Dorado, and it was used to ask a dance to some performer that was working in the club, generally cross-dressed performer. And it is one token that I found in a market, and it was put in a box with a lot of other tokens, and with no importance. They did not give any kind of importance, and I think opposite that for our history is very, very important. Okay, you can go straight. And this is another kind of artifact that I like, and are the pinbacks. This is one of the first political pinback made in Italy, related to the then called gay liberation movement of the 70s. It was made by the Fore. Fore was the first gay organization that was born in Italy in 1971. And I think that this pin was made around 1978. So it is one of the first examples of queer political pins made in Italy. There were many made after in the 80s, in the 90s, but in the 70s was not so usual in Italy. differently than the USA. In USA, that there were many pinbacks of this kind in the 70s. Okay, we can go straight. This is an early example of flyer that was mimeographed, and it was about a festival, a movie festival with all LGBT themed movies that was held in Florence, so in my very near to my home. This in 1982. And the very first kind of political flyers of the queer LGBTQ plus movement in Italy were made with this similar to this, so mimeographed. Then after there were other kind of flyers like made with stocky paper and with the computer graphic also, but this is one of the first types. Okay, this is one example of erotic literature that was bought by a mainstream public, but had in this case a lesbian theme. The lesbian theme was quite popular in erotic literature, and we have to say generally with the direction of these novels was to heterosexual men generally. But I always say I cannot say that also some lesbians liked these novels, also if the structure of the novel is not a structure made really sympathetically for lesbians. Also the writer of this novel is a man. And it is funny that for example, they always tell that in France there were a lot of this kind of novels, but I have found that in Spain there are maybe even more novels of this kind before the Franco dictatorship. There was a very prolific production of erotic literature with every kind of subject, from BDSM to LGBT subjects, and sometimes also very strong. There were sometimes also pornographic novels that did not leave any space to the fantasy. And the funny thing is that they were not sold underground, but they were sold at small bookshops or at small news stands, no? So they were sold publicly, not underground. Okay, you can go straight. This is another postcard related to the El Dorado Club, and depicted is Hansi Sturm, who was the main performer in El Dorado, and she won also a prize for Miss El Dorado in 1926. There was like there was a prize for the best cross-dressed performer, and Hansi Sturm won the prize. Lately, I have read a sort of biography of Ansi Sturm, of what happened to her, but I think that there is still a lot to tell about her life. Some part of her life are still is still not very studied. Okay, you can go. And in this case, I think that I can leave the word just for a moment to Andrea, because he's related this poster to the movie Splendore e Miseria di Madame Royale.
Okay, sure.
Maybe
I will talk more in what?
Or maybe move down a little because of the light.
Sure. Okay. I will talk. Okay, freely. Yes. What can I tell you in advance before I start with my discourse? This film, Splendore e Miserie di Madame Royale, is the movie about which we have made our book, which is called Quelle come me. And this was the very first film made in Italy with a homosexual leading character. And then I will talk about it more in focus, because there are some items of Luca's collection that I want to comment. So this is all I've got to say now, and I give the microphone back to Luca.
There's still some slides coming, by the way.
Of course there are. Okay.
Yes, no, the funny thing of this poster, maybe Andrea did not say, but I think that is important to say, is that you can see over the script l'altra faccia del vizietto, which means the other face of Vizietto. Vizietto is the Italian title for La Cage aux Folles movie with Ugo Tognazzi and Michel Serrault. Then what happened? Splendore e Miseria di Madame Royale was not a successful movie. When La Cage aux Folles went out in 1978 and it was a big success, then the Splendore e Miseria di Madame Royale was reissued and was also bring to other countries, and there were made some publicity material to try to convince people to go to see the movie. And in this publicity material, they made some mention to the La Cage aux Folles. So people say, oh, he's the same actor of La Cage aux Folles, so we go to see this movie. That was not a success, in fact. You have to say something, Andrea.
No, I don't. We will have to speak more in depth of it because there are several other items about the same topic. So I will say something more later, but then you can move forward.
Okay, so this is another example of what we can call everyday life material, and is a photo made by a private person during a gay camp. In Italy, there were, from 1978, there were organized gay camps in the summer, organized by gay association. The first gay camps were organized by a gay, but I can say not only gay, I can say LGBT, by an LGBT magazine that was named Lambda. And they made sometimes some kind of jokes, some kind of campy parades, during the camps. And the man that you can see dressed like a widow is Felix Cossolo, that is the founder of the Lambda magazine and the organizer of that camps. So that is why I choose this photo, because when you show photo with the private, with the people, and these people are not activists, they are not known people, maybe some don't want to be shown. In this case, I know that I can show because they are quite known activists, so there is no problem. And this kind of material is difficult to show material, because if you have, for example, if you find a very nice photo, and this photo is about, for example, a private party, maybe made in the 50s in one private apartment, is quite a risk to publish, for example, in a book, because maybe some relative of some people depicted in the photo can recognize and can make some problem, maybe. So you have always to be careful. And when we talk, when there are books, for example, about the LGBT movement in Italy, generally they choose photos where there are very well-known activists. Okay? So this is another thing that I think Andrea can tell something about.
But do you want me to comment the photos right now, or shall we go back to them later?
We have this one and this one, just that you know.
Okay, so I have missed the opportunity of speaking of the other one because I'm silly, but now allora, what I'm gonna do is to go back to everything we have seen before, because when the film was screened for the first time in 1970, it was publicized with several photos which depicted Ugo Tognazzi in his travesti costume, dressed as Madame Royale, which is the character that his own character likes to dress like. So the public was led to think that the film was all about a cross-dresser, and everybody knew Tognazzi because in the past he had used several cross-dressing outfits, so he was very well known because of his comedic skills. And those who made those who publicized the film decided to make the public think that the film was a comedy. Actually, it is not entirely a comedy. It has a mixed fixtures, and it turns out to be a thriller in the end, and it has a very tragic ending. So the public felt somehow deceived by the publicity. In fact, the film, as Luca said before, was not a success at all. It earned only 300 million, which was a very low, income for a film with Ugo Tognazzi as the lead. So this lobby card, which is part of Luca's collection, is part of the Spanish publicity material of the film, and it depicts a scene which is not in the film, because one of the most well-remembered scenes of the film is about a party which is thrown at Tognazzi's character house, an travesti party, and it is well remembered because it's one of the funniest scenes in the whole film. And in the center of the photo you can see Antonio Barlocco, who was the lead of the company of the Legnanesi, which was a very known Antravesti company from Lombardy, and Vittorio Caprioli, the director of the film, decided to give the company members some small parts as extras in the scene of the party. And as I was saying before, this scene was the frame which is depicted here is not seen in the film because the scene was shot more in length, and some parts of it were not actually seen by the public. But as Vittorio Caprioli and other members of the cast said, they were maybe some of the funniest parts of the film. So everything shot in these scenes was part of some improvisation filming, and unfortunately we cannot see it. We cannot see it any longer because it was cut out from the editing. So we can only imagine how these scenes could be like. So I can give you back.
I think that the important thing to say in this case, because we talk about the everyday life material, is that in this case, with the image that Andrea commented before, that was a publicity image, so it was quite well distributed. No, in this case, you can reconstruct a scene of the movie that was not in the movie with the publicity material. So this kind of material, in this case for the cinema, that were sold to people to publish the film, not the movie, are very important sometimes to try to reconstruct the movie in some parts that you can also not see in the movie. And this is another example of how publicity can be wrong, because because you see in this poster an image of a comedy movie, and the people were thinking to go to see a comedy movie, which is not absolutely. So when they went to see the movie, many they went out of the cinema very upset. And I think that also in this case they used this image to attract more people, but the movie was had a completely different atmosphere than this poster. Okay, and also this one is.
I believe this is the last.
Yeah, this is also an example of a flyer, as I say you before, mimeographed, related to the LGBT movement in Italy. In this case, is a flyer of 1976. I want to explain one thing. When I talk about LGBT or LGBTQ plus is because generally of the decade. When I talk about the 70s, the movement had in the 70s a different name that was gay liberation movement. In some cases, some groups of this movement were groups that were gay, lesbian, and transgender. In some cases, no. So I have to sometimes to vary the name upon the association I am talking about. In this case, so the is an event made by Fore, the first LGBT association in Italy, in Florence in 1976. And I think there are no more, or maybe another one.
Last one.
Okay, this is the last one, and is an example of homophobic material. This postcard came from Italy from the 1940s, so we are absolutely in the middle of the fascist period. And there is a caption that say non maschio ma vile femminuccia. So not a masculine man, but an effeminate and not good person. And so this is a typical example of how the fascist regime hated every kind of not only sexuality, but also behavior that was not hyper-masculine. The hyper-masculinity was considered the only way to be a man. I don't think that they used this effeminate man as a stereotype, but I think that the stereotype is something quite strange, because in this case is used in a bad way, but there are effeminate men, and they are at the same, they are not less than masculine men. So we can use this postcard also with another caption and say, I am fabulous, for example. And the sense of the postcard is different. So I think that this is the last one, maybe. Okay. And I don't want to take any other space, because I know that Sara and Gerard.
Luca.
Also, okay, is another flyer, another mimeographed flyer, but related to a club. So we are used to see flyers of club very elaborated, with a lot of colors. This was one very rudimental type of a flyer of 1977 from Florence. And now I think that Sara and Gerard have a lot of things to say, and I want to give them the word. Thank you.
Let me just, before Sara, you have the floor, just to say, for those of you out there online, perhaps if you have a question, feel free to let us know in the chat, or you can type your question in the chat, or just save it for the discussion towards the end. We'll be doing presentations first. So please, Sara, the floor is yours.
Here I am. Hi, everyone. And thank you for inviting me to be in Amsterdam virtually today. I prefer to be there physically, but it's really important to be here with a lot of friends and with new friends from Mistral. So I'm very proud to tell some stories through archival materials from our collection. And I want to introduce a little bit, sorry, just before, I apologize for my very rusty English, but due to the pandemic situation in Italy, we haven't the chance to host our students from the States, like every year. For 2 years, we didn't host any students, and I think now they are returning, so my English will improve. I will practice a lot this year. So I'm, as I told you before, I represent here Cassero and the archive and library and special collection at Cassero LGBTI Center of Bologna. I don't know if someone of you went to Bologna before. I'm bringing you to Bologna virtually now, but I hope you visit our center and come to visit the archive. Our center has a long story. Next year we will celebrate our 40 years old. We are 40 years old. We started our activities in 1982. The association and the library also started from the very beginning. And this was due to a very strong idea of the association. The first activists, they decided they want a center, a community center. They were, you must not imagine a center like the one we have today, we live today, but they were poor, but with a lot of fantasy. And they give shape to what we have now. I think I can think this and tell you, they dreamt something we have now. So it's very important for us to collect materials from items from that period, starting from the end of before the Cassero was born, from the end of the 60s. And the association in Bologna is particularly important for Italian LGBT movement, because we were the first homosexual association to receive a venue from a local administration, from a public administration in Italy. It was the first time. So this was like a little bit revolutionary. So every other association or group in Italy wanted to do the same. So it's like pioneeristic experience in Italy. And we started, as I told you, we started to collect materials, books, periodicals, magazines, everything that was very difficult to find at that time. And the first activists, they wanted to empower the community. This is an archive, community-based, so everyone used to bring to the archive everything they found from newspapers, clippings, movies, recordings from TV, t-shirts, pins, everything. So it's a very various collection. But the main part of the collection naturally now is a very huge library. We have a library now, we own more than 20,000 books and 10,000 and growing videos. So that documents activities of the association, but we have also movies and every kind of audiovisual materials. And just to tell you, to introduce you how is composed our collection, and to arrive now to the theme, to the subject of our conversation, we naturally collect a lot of different objects and artifacts and different items that tells a lot of stories, naturally. And today, with my colleagues, we choose some, only 6 or 7 stories, but we have many more. And I think this is a good way to give to thank people that came previously, that work, the activists before me, before us, and it's really important for, I know it's really important for young people also in the association to mirror in that stories and to find a way to build their new way, the future of the community. So the archives are not something in a place stored, are always living and telling stories, telling new stories. We tell these stories using the digital opportunities. For example, this year we are doing a very big project digitization project, national, with other LGBT archives on the national ground. So I think there are many good perspectives for our future. And it's important to talk, as we do today, to talk about how to improve this future for the LGBT and queer archives. So I want to tell you some story. An important thing I didn't tell you is, and it's really important, in 2018, we were recognized from the Italian government, from the Ministry of Culture, and our heritage was declared a national historical heritage. So it's really important. It's I think I always say I think it's we didn't earn money by that, but it's really important because I think it's a way to say thank you to the many people that did a lot of things to build a place like Cassero, every place, every space, free space and safe space for people in the community. So it's a good news. I'm gonna start examining my first slide, and we choose some images. This one is I don't know, there was one previous with the complete I don't know if you maybe they were mixed. Can you go down, please? Scroll down if I see there's another no. Okay, maybe maybe you didn't. This is okay. This is our place. So just because you are here, this is our place. It's an historical building in the very center of Bologna, and as you see, it is a beautiful rainbow coming out of the window, and the library is on the window on the right window you see in the image. So. It doesn't matter. I go to the image before. I tried to. It was just to show you the box where this board game was kept, because this everything of this monopoly or queeropoly, I don't know, is handmade, is an artifact, really an artifact. So here you can say some particulars, and this was in 1986. This was a present given for the Cassero's president Diego Scudiero, the one in the photo on the left, for his birthday, and it just became president of the association. And so the other activists and friends, they prepared this game, this board game with it's very funny and very camp and ironic, because it talks about the community, that people. You can see photographs, and the game is based. It's like a Monopoly. It's is based on these cards. As you can see, you can steal husbands and you can steal bartenders. So it's very camp. And the placeholders, for example, as you can see in the images, are Barbie's shoes with high heels and boots, and so very camp way of playing this game. And also I think this game is very representative of the community at that time, at the beginning of the story of our association, because every one of them, I know personally, many of them, someone is not here anymore, but many of them tell about the atmosphere of the association. The building you see on the left is the Cassero di Porta Saragozza, the first place I told before, and this place we stayed in from 1982 to 2002, and now it's 20 years we are in the new place you have seen before. Both of them are historical buildings that solicited the fantasies of this community. This is quite like a castle, as you can see. And so the atmosphere was of the community was quite like a family. They describe as a family. So this game is a witness of that time. They used to joke about their life inside the association, and as you can see, sometimes there are the images from a theatrical group in Cassero, the KGB Cassero Gay Band and Ballet. It was a camp theater group, very popular in Italy. The group was active for a long time with a lot of exhibition all around Italy and naturally in Bologna. I told you about the atmosphere because I think it's really important. These kind of items are really important to make us understand this atmosphere where people they say we have a lot of fierce discussions, for example, for stupid things, but they used to have creative deliria. We say delirio, but I don't know in English the right way to translate this word, because in the LGBT community, Italian LGBT community, when you say delirare or delirio, it means creative, queer way of imagining you are more than you really are in your life. So a camp way to survive, and it's really important. And because they create a lot. They were so few people and poor association, very poor association. They had to buy, for example, furnitures for the association from second-hand places or findings. There were people sleeping in the spaces of the Cassero di Porta Saragozza because they didn't have an home. So it was a family, quite like a family. So I thought it was important to show you, and very ironic and very camp to show you this item. So if you want, you can. Okay, this is we are talking about artifacts, and what better to talk about this brick. And we are not talking, this is not an archaeological findings from the ancient LGBT community in Bologna. You know, we have Roman and Etruscan origins in Bologna, very ancient, but we don't know much about the LGBT community at that time. I'm joking, naturally. This is a broken brick from a wall that was erected just in front of the main door at Cassero di Porta Saragozza, the one you saw before. And in the night between 19 and 20, December 1999. I was there. I was working at volunteering at the bar that night, and then I went home and I went away with my other colleagues. And in the morning after, we found a very big, tall wall that in front of the door. I'm laughing, but it was a very sad act. Someone told it was Goliardic. And as you can see on the right, if you want, if you're curious, you can go on YouTube and find the video that documents from the Italian TV, from the Italian news on national TV, and that documents that story. And so, but the important thing is they did the wall, and then at the end they hung up I'm sorry, something with the words, a piece of paper, I remember, because we collect also the piece of paper with the words open behind, with a clearly homophobic meaning. And so this was a very sad moment for the association. And the brick was donated to the archive many years ago from one of our activists, and was and story in the story, the brick was exposed to in an exhibition, during an exhibition at Cassero, celebrating the story of the association. And during one of these nights, a couple they had problems. They took the brick and they throw away. So the brick was broken by this couple wearing. So stories of items in the archives are really, but we preserve this brick even if it's broken. It's not an really archaeological findings, so it's okay. So you can go. So this is another collection. This is a private collection donated to the library, the archive recently by Franco Grillini. Franco Grillini is very important in the Italian LGBT movement. Maybe someone of you know him. I think Gerard met him 2 years ago when he came to San Francisco, and he was so proud to have you guiding him to visit the museum. So he told me you were fantastic. And Franco gave us this, I called it, we used to call the James Bond briefcase. Maybe we can say James Condom briefcase, because this was a collection. This is a collection of every different kind of condoms, and as you can see, I tried to put some samples. We go from every kind of political, military, lighters with a small space to keep inside a condom, or like a cigarette packaging, or Italian, foreign. There we have many different, and this was used. This collection started around 1990, and Franco used this to go to promote sexual prevention, to prevent the spreading of HIV and in Italy, and they went to promote a culture of health prevention. And they did it as usual in an ironical way, because there are so many ironic way of talking about condoms and how to use. You know, Italy is a place, is a nation where it was at the beginning it was really difficult to talk about the use of condom. So it was really important, the work that was made by these activists. As you can see in the image, you can see, for example, condoms from places, restaurants, discos. So it was really important, this work of collecting, and for us to trace this memory of the community, important memory, really important part of the story, of our story. So you can go on. This one is another collection. These are 3 historical stamps of our association. I didn't tell you before, the association was named in different ways. It started as Collettivo Socialista Bolognese, the stamp you can see on the left. In 1977, this is the ancestor of actual Cassero, and this association was really small and started during the student movement in 1977, and in 1978 it became Circolo Culturale 28 Giugno, 28th of June, a very ambitious name, I think. And you can see two stamps from the Circolo 28 in different years, 2 stamps from the Circolo 28 Giugno. These items give us problems in preservation, because this is the chance to tell you that we have many different materials. Sometimes these modern materials are more fragile than the oldest. So, and sometimes we don't know, we must study how to preserve them from damage, so it's really important to tell also this. Okay, go. This is about music. As you can see, music, I think it's really, really important for every LGBTQ person in the world. And these are items from 3 different collections we own. And as you can see, there are on the right, there are very camp covers from international, both international and Italian singers and groups. I want to show you particularly the one on focus on the one on the left, because this is a terrible cover, but it was customized by the owner, and so I don't know if you can read, but there are some little writings, and so this is this vinyl record has a particular story. I don't tell you now because it's very complex, because it's quite, as you can see, the title of the track was Keka Dance, and that means like faggot dance. I don't know, I can compare to, it's very expressive. And we have 2 in our collection. It's very rare, because when this disc went out, it was very little distributed, and because it was quite like pornographic, as you can say. That's one, but it was it's in our collection, even if it was like an homophobic vinyl with homophobic intentions. There's a story, you can read it if you read Italian, I'm sorry, on the very important side of Giovanni Dall'Orto, is an Italian historical of the LGBT movement and culture. And you can hear, if you go on YouTube, you can find the track. The other vinyl I want to show you is the little one at the center. And this is I don't know in English, sorry, it's 45 giri, we say in Italiano. Maybe someone more expert than me can tell how it's in English. And this is a song from John Peter Boom. It's a singer, a Dutch singer, maybe you know, and he was an activist also. They used to live in Italy, and this song was, I think this. I'm not so. I'm a little blind. I don't see. Maybe the title track you see is the B-side of the disc, and it's another title, very homosexual title. He loves him in English, the title. But John Peter Boom was an activist, was part of the first Italian LGBT movement. I cut the story short, but it's important because this was, I think, the first very explicit music and lyrics to talk about homosexuality in Italy, and it was censored and it was removed from, I think, maybe Luca knows more than me about that. But I just wanted to show that we own this kind of collection. So if you want, I don't know if, okay. There's no, quello è Gerard, manca ancora qualcosa. No, I think we are.
I think that's it, Sarah.
Yeah, it's it. Yeah. Okay, thank you for your attention. If you have questions, I'm here.
We're going to save them up. Yeah.
Okay.
Gerard, without further ado, may I leave it to you?
Yes, thank you very much. And hold off on the slides for a moment. I'm going to do a brief introduction and we'll go from there.
Okay.
Thank you. So what I'd like to just say is that the queer history of everyday life has fascinated me for more than 4 decades. And as a way of framing why this subject has intrigued me personally and why I think it has broader significance for LGBTQ people and for our societies in general, what I'd like to do talk a little bit about my engagement with the question over the last 45 years. I started coming out as a teen in Los Angeles in the mid-1970s. But even before that, when I was a little kid, I had learned to sneak around my local public library looking for old books that mentioned homosexuality, books which I could then furtively read in a hidden corner of the stacks with nobody the wiser that I was learning about something I probably shouldn't be learning about. And once I began to tell my friends about my sexuality and get involved in the gay community in the mid-1970s, I soon expanded this search for signs of LGBTQ people in the past, combing used bookstores and charity shops and any place I could find old paper to look for the traces of our existence in the past. By the late 1970s, I had learned about the archives and library of Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute for Sexual Science in Weimar, Berlin, and about some of the early efforts to think about the possibility of identifying a past for LGBTQ people. And I also had discovered that queer history activists at the time were organizing archives that I could actually visit. And I soon found my way to what was then called the National Gay Archives in Los Angeles. It's now known as the One Archives at the University of Southern California. In the 1980s, I moved into the world of what we would now call LGBTQ archives and libraries in a much more serious way. In 1981, as a graduate student at Stanford University, I founded a student initiative called the Stanford Lesbian and Gay Archives Project. And our task there was to try to trace the history of LGBTQ people at the university, which had been founded in 1891. When I got there as a graduate student in 1979, nobody could even tell me when the Gay Student Organization had been founded, even though it had only been founded in 1973. So the memory had disappeared very quickly, and I wanted to start finding out a bit more about that. Also in the 1980s, in 1985, I had the pleasure of participating in the founding public meeting of the GLBT Historical Society here in San Francisco, and I've remained very active in that institution ever since, serving at various times as an archives volunteer, a board member, an exhibitions curator, director of communications, as the senior public history advisor, and I continue to serve a role as a consultant with the organization today, most recently around the announcement and exhibition of our new acquisition, the only remaining remnant of one of the two original 1978 rainbow flags. And likewise, in the mid-1980s, I had become a serious collector of LGBTQ books, periodicals, ephemera, artifacts, anything I could find that might trace the past of queer people. And by 1990, I also had started my career as a dealer in those kinds of materials, which I did alongside my main job at the time, working in the field of nonprofit publishing. Now I lay out that early past, which I think many of us might recount similar kinds of stories of starting to look for some kind of LGBTQ history, in order to raise the question about what really drove this passion for scouting, gathering, organizing, interpreting, and finding suitable homes for traces of the LGBTQ past, something that in my case, I can trace all the way back to my childhood. And I think that, like many LGBTQ people of my generation, I grew up thinking that I must be the only queer in my family, the only queer in my town, the only queer I was ever likely to know, that I was alone on this planet and in time. That, of course, was mistaken, as I would soon find out. But still, I found no sign of same-sex desire or non-normative gender in my grandparents' stories of the past, in the photo albums maintained by my family, in the lives of the people around me who I knew personally as a young person, in my school books, in museums, in short, in the places that we look to see reflections of people like us in earlier times. The places that cisgender and heterosexual people can find those things from birth as a kind of birthright that they just expect to have, that it's invisible to them because it's so readily available. And so finding no one like me in the past as a young person, seeing no one like me in the present, meant that I could not imagine possibilities for a course for my own life into the future, that having that flow of time is crucial to all of us for our self-esteem, our sense of self. So I really felt that I was trapped in a conception of temporality, of timeliness, and of the possible life course that had been constructed by and for straight and cisgender people. And I felt as a result as if I were in exile from the flow of time itself. Now, as I began to participate in queer culture, I recognized that many of my LGBTQ peers shared that feeling, often not in a very strongly recognized way, and that they acted in ways reflecting the limitations imposed by our banishment from time, that they likewise couldn't imagine a future queer life for themselves where they would grow old and leave a heritage because they had never seen any queer people around them do that. And it's here that I trace the roots of my lifelong pursuit of everyday LGBTQ history. I was looking to find my queer ancestors, the stories, the mementos of ordinary people like me who managed the extraordinary feat of living queer lives and forming queer culture against the odds in a society that had rejected them, in a system of family and public memory that willfully forgot them, and in a construction of formal history that erased them. And responding to that blank, I set out to track down any print materials, any documents, any images, any objects that might connect me to other LGBTQ people who had been lost to time. And at first I did this in a kind of instinctive way, but as my skills developed and as my networks of connection to other people interested in these practices developed, I really began to sharpen my abilities as a scout, as a researcher, as a historian. And in the process, the search for everyday queer history came to be a central part of my own ongoing exercise of self, a practice that Michel Foucault refers to as ascesis. And although that will be a rather arcane reference to Foucault, let me assure you that it will not remain impenetrable when we look at the objects I'm going to show. We will come right back down to earth with Michel Foucault as an actual human being, not a fancy philosopher. And my immense pleasure now is to find myself part of a worldwide cultural movement focused on retrieving, sharing, and interpreting the stories of ordinary LGBTQ people in the past. And it's, of course, an equal pleasure to find myself today in the company of fellow collectors, antiquarian dealers, independent scholars, academic historians, documentaries, filmmakers, artists, and others from around the world of the sorts that are taking part in this panel right now, or as some of us experienced in 2018 in Berlin at the most recent International LGBTQ Archives, Libraries, Museums, and Special Collections Conference. At that event, there were more than 450 people from around the world who came together to focus on this question. And when I think back to when I first started taking an interest in this in the mid-1970s, at that point, I would estimate there were perhaps 40 people in the world actively involved in organizing around LGBTQ history. So it's been a very considerable growth. Now, many of those people who are at the conference and who I talk about more globally today share this impulse that I already described, the desire to restore to LGBTQ people a place in the flow of time, to restore us to a space in public memory, and to give us our rightful position in the shared histories of our societies. And to give you an idea of some of the ways I've pursued this effort just as a private collector, and of course my collection ultimately I will donate to an appropriate institution, let me show you just 3 examples of kinds of material that I've gathered, focusing on the categories that I might create artificially as publications, places, and practices. And those are, of course, categories that ultimately overlap and interpenetrate, as you'll see. So on to the first slide, please. Great. So what we're seeing here are some fabulously trashy French publications. My second language is French, and I usually spend 2 or 3 months a year there, pandemic permitting. Haven't there now for a while. But the reason I'm showing us these is that, of course, important books by major psychiatrists and sexologists are readily found in university libraries and have always been guarded as important contributions to our knowledge, often contributions that we as queer people find problematic. What's much harder to find are these sorts of trashy popular publications that translate ways of thinking about sexuality into forms of really entertainment and exploitation. These are all books by Jean Fauconnet under the pseudonym Dr. Coffenon. He published also as Dr. Jaff and as Aignan, a very prolific writer of sexual exploitation books, both fiction and putative nonfiction. We don't know his dates of birth and death. He's such an obscure figure, but he published from 1901 to 1950. And these ones I'm particularly fond of from my collection because you get to see the ways that these books were used and reused. So you have Feminine Vices from 1923 at the top there, and then translated, if you can call it that, into English, in a translation that is clearly was someone who really didn't speak English and was working with a French-English dictionary. It's utterly incoherent and full of typographical errors. And yet there was a market of English-speaking tourists in France that were looking for dirty books they couldn't get at home. And then finally, what you see next to that is the discrete dust jacket that was provided by the bookstore for the English language version that turns it into simply being the Armand bookstore and advertising some of their products. And I love that this way of hiding the fact that you were buying this dirty book and bringing it back probably to England, was preserved over all these years and is still there. You get a sense of how people in France more openly bought such materials from English-speaking countries where they were not legal, had to buy them as a kind of contraband and sneak them home. What these books say is often problematic. I'll talk that just a little bit more. On the bottom, you see another range of the same book by Dr. Coffenon, the 1909 first edition of Homosexuality in Men and Women. This is quite a scarce book. Even the French National Library does not have the first edition of this volume. Then you see a mid-1920s reprint with a kind of racy, trashy Art Nouveau cover. And then you see a 1931 American English language translation of the book under the new title, Unisexual Love. So these books had a way of being repurposed, repackaged as a kind of trashy exploitation product. And what I would like to say just briefly about this kind of book is that although they often portray homosexuality and transgender behaviors in what we might see as a negative way, I hope we can restore them to the way that they were used and read at the time, in that LGBTQ people were geniuses at reading against the text or through the text to find positive traces or ways of reinterpreting this material to give us a place in the world and to assert that we exist. We were used to reading the newspapers and noticing in this story, oh, that obituary of a dead person doesn't mention a spouse or children. Maybe they were queer. That we had to read a general discourse that portrayed us negatively and find ways to transform it into something positive. That's one of the origins of camp practices. Let's look at the second slide. So this second slide is one where I'm going to talk a bit about places. I also do a lot of work as a place-based historian and on queer historic preservation and telling our stories through places in the real world. In part, I do that because human memory functions in a variety of ways, cognitively, physiologically in the brain, that we remember things in various ways. And one of our most primal forms of memory is the memory of places. Even animals have a strong memory of places and whether they are safe places or not, whether there's a place that you can find food or water, whether they're a place that has emotions attached to them. So for me, looking to attaching our history to places is very important. And so here's just one example of a group of materials gathered from the Castro Theater in the Castro district, the main gay district in San Francisco. It's a big Art Deco movie house that was built in 1923. And by the late 1960s, early 1970s, it had started showing old movies that would appeal to the gay population that already was moving into the neighborhood. At a point when you couldn't see classic films on video, your only chance was if there happened to be a movie theater that would dig up old movies and show them. And it became a very popular place for particularly gay men in the neighborhood to see films and to cruise for someone to pick up. Ultimately, it became the home to the Frameline Festival, the international LGBTQ film festival in San Francisco, the oldest in the world, and has been the place where world premieres or San Francisco premieres of many important queer films have taken place. It's a large theater, it seats 2,100 people. And so, for example, the film Milk, Gus Van Zant's biopic about Harvey Milk, had a premiere there in 2008. And continued to show 3 times a day for 7 months in this huge movie theater. It really was a major cultural moment in the neighborhood. And so what you see here are, as a true obsessed collector, anytime I see a fragment, I grab it. So at one point walking by, one of the letters used on the marquee to spell out what movie was showing had been blown off in a storm and was laying on the sidewalk. So that's the letter D. I picked that up around 1990. In 1989, when the Loma Prieta earthquake hit San Francisco, the theater was closed for 3 months and they did a bunch of repair and renovation. And as they threw out stuff that they had pulled out of the theater that had fallen down in the earthquake, I went through the gigantic dumpster and you see one of the craftsman tiles that was used to decorate the theater in 1923. A whole lot of them are still there, but this one fell off and they simply threw it away. I took 3 of them. Or one of the handles from a seat in the theater that was replaced in 2001, and they simply threw them out in a dumpster, and I went and detached the handles and saved them. Or when the sidewalk in front of the theater was replaced 10 years ago, and they jackhammered out the decorative sidewalk in front, I claimed a large piece of the concrete with some of the decorative tiles there. So there you have a very tangible, a literally concrete piece of art history that would otherwise be ephemeral. And that's one of the tiles that it was installed about 1970. And so numerous movie stars and major film directors and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of LGBTQ people walked across that tile over the years going into the theater or simply walking down Castro Street. These are the kinds of tangible objects that are great for exhibitions. In an exhibition, it gets tiresome just looking at pieces of paper. And things have a kind of, objects have a way of sparking our fantasies, our memories, our emotions, often in ways that a mere piece of paper does not. Let's look at the last example here. So next slide. And here I'm going to talk a bit about practices and the way these objects of ordinary life, that if you simply saw this sitting in a box, you would think, well, it's a tablet of paper or it's an extremely cheap ballpoint pen. Of the sort that we all see in our family homes growing up, and in trash bins and in charity stores, and they're really not meaningful until we attach the story of a queer everyday life to them. And what we're seeing here are 2 objects from gay bars in San Francisco. The Stud was opened in 1966, it closed in 2020. One of the longest running gay bars in San Francisco, really a celebrated gay bar. And what that is a little tablet of paper that they handed out at the bar where you could write down the number, or the phone number and name of the person you were picking up. You could tear it off and write down your number and give it to someone. So it becomes more than merely a pad of paper. It becomes a representation of a practice of sexual and social connection in these commercially mediated spaces. The ballpoint pen is one that I particularly cherish because it's from a gay bar called The Ambush, which was open from, The Arena, which was open from 1978 to 1985. And it was one of the major leather bars in the South of Market Folsom Leather District. And it was perhaps the purest and butchest of the leather bars. The reason I grabbed this pen when a local dealer in used pornography had a few of these and I grabbed them, it's like, wow, this is a find. This was Michel Foucault's favorite leather bar in San Francisco. Gail Rubin told me the story of which bars Foucault preferred, and it was the one he really liked going to. So to have a 10-cent ballpoint pen from Michel Foucault's favorite leather bar makes for a very evocative object. It's no longer just a pen advertising some business. It connects us to the emergence of sexual practices, of a queer sexual subculture, and the way that that queer sexual subculture then influenced the experience and the thought of one of the major philosophers of the late 20th century, all there in a cheap pen. So the everyday life of queers also connects us to the intellectual life of queers and the way that intellectual life has influenced the thinking of our cultures in general. That's what I have to say about my objects, and I think I'll now hand off to Reeb so we can have any questions or conversation.
Thank you very much, Gerard. Just a moment, let me find my way back here. Luca, Sara, and Gerard, all 3 of you, for your contributions. It shows how much there is to be said because we ran a little bit towards the max of time that we had in mind as is. But I think given what we've discussed and what's passed us by here, definitely deserves a few questions. If there are questions, again, please let me know through the chat. I'm going to kick it off just for a moment, because there is one thing there are actually two questions that have sort of stayed with me throughout these three presentations. And now actually a third one arose with this last pen that was shown, which is, hold on, let me just, so that I can see everybody. I noticed that in a lot of the items that have passed us by, there is a certain power that can be found in the self-irony or the comic. We spoke about it in relationship to the film. I found that it was evident also in, as you called it, Sara, the campiness of the queer monopoly, the playfulness, I suppose, of some of the postcards and other matchbooks that we've seen. There is a celebration in this. Would one of you three perhaps want to answer as to the importance of that specific kind of sensibility, I suppose, as being historically a fundament of queer history, and collecting it and archiving it? What kind of role that maybe plays? Was that a clear question? Luca, Gerard?
Yes, I'll jump in quickly just to say that one thing we can say is that for highly marginalized social groups that don't see themselves reflected in the mainstream culture, claiming and perverting fragments of the mainstream culture, transforming them into something they weren't intended to be, often with a sense of irony and even of black humor, turning our persecution into an object of mockery as one of the only ways we can respond to being persecuted when we're powerless. We'll refuse to take the persecution seriously. We don't participate in it. We laugh at it at the same time that we understand how much pain it's causing. That's really been a constructing element of LGBTQ culture and of LGBTQ resistance for centuries. And it's a form of humor that we have to learn when we move into our cultures. And I think it also relates to that practice of reading against or through the statements of mainstream culture that I talked about in looking at those trashy novels, that queer folk at the time had a sense of humor, and they would pick up this book that was talking about how horrible queer people were, and they would laugh at the book. They wouldn't say, oh, we're being persecuted. They say, this is ridiculous, how absurd. And then they would enact some of the absurdities in comic form. So I think that's some of what we see in these materials. And it's one of the things that to me is very empowering in gathering them, is to learn about those really ingenious practices of resistance in which having fun and making fun are practices of resistance.
But given that, how then does that act of resistance, through that playfulness, through that self-irony, how would you argue, if that being the case, is different in establishing history, in establishing that kind of heritage? That could lead to a different kind of sensibility in writing that narrative compared to...
Absolutely, I think it's both in finding it, in that we have to bring that ingenious way of looking at materials into our interrogation of the past, and not necessarily take the documents, objects, texts at face value and understand they weren't taken at face value at the time by other queer people, and then start using our own historical practice, applying some of that same ingenious form of multiplicities of thought in which each thing we say also questions itself or mocks itself. That's part of the pleasure, particularly of doing things like exhibitions, where you can really bring people into this liberatory way of thinking about our present as well as our past, that everything is up for question, and that anything that's worth taking seriously is also worth making fun of.
Sarah, I thought it was interesting the point that you made, that the Castello Saragossa, that the historic aspect of this catered to the fantasy also of the queer community. And with this particular object, which I very much appreciate you having shown us, these bricks, it's a very clear example of this. There was a verbally violent act, a physically, let's say architecturally, for lack of a better word, act of violence against the building itself and what it represents. When you came to see that the wall was there, the letter making a very sort of mischievous and foul reference to the organization, and that then being celebrated, the letter being kept, the bricks being kept and even thrown. Would you say that's also an example of what you were speaking about, how the institution, so not just the collection, but the actual building, the idea of the home itself, then has to deal and incorporate this into the greater story?
Yeah, sure. I appreciate your what you say, because I think it's really for us it was important to remember also that story about the building life, the community life, and there's also a comic thing I didn't tell you before about the story. The people doing that wall, rising the wall during the night, then we discovered they were students from the engineering faculty of University of Bologna, and they did the wall taking water from the Vespasiano. I don't know if you know what's the Vespasiano was in French is a pissoir, I think. I don't know if in English.
A public urinal.
Yeah. So they went back and forth from this place. It was the last Vespasiano in Bologna, and this place was one of the most popular places where gay men meet and for batouage and so for sex, immediate sex, so it's I think even this story is in that direction. So we use our story to be resilient, to build our resilience, and it's how Gerard very well said. I think we are difficult to understand sometimes if you watch the histories, the community histories from outside. From, for example, sometimes I work with the archivists from mainstream archives, and they are not able to understand our language, our way of talking. We have a code, we have a way of building our story, to tell our stories, very coded. So I think this is an important part of improving LGBT community archives. It's not to tell that mainstream archives are worse than, but I think it's really important we tell our story, we collect our story, we preserve, and we give access to every people through digital and through physical collections. And I don't know if I answered, but I...
Maybe before I give it to anyone else who has a question, one final question from me. It was news about 2 weeks ago in the New York Times that eBay has now stopped making it possible for the buying and the selling online of, I don't know the right way to say it, but sexually loaded objects and items. And it was specific in this article that this is contrary and very much counterproductive to establishing an LGBTQ history. So many of the historians, archivists, collectors who are very much dependent on eBay are obviously now having to deal with the repercussions of this kind of moral/commercial action. Is there something that one of you wants to say about it?
Yes, because you let me.
You're muted. Sorry. No, on this computer you're muted.
Sorry.
Can you unmute him on the laptop?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so you let me know about what this decision of eBay, I did not know, but I noticed since 1 month that when searching myself LGBT material on eBay, for example, now it's very difficult to find LGBT Italian magazine from the 70s. Because in the 70s there were many LGBT magazines that used nude men in the cover, and there were a lot of pornographic also magazines that were not useful for an erotic purpose, but they were important also to create a community. Inside the magazine there were sometimes some how can you say, contact forms, not to contact people, for example, so you can know a person, a very old way, a very old style chat. Yeah. And also inside this magazine there were articles about new clubs. If a new LGBT club was opened, there was an article. And this happened a lot also in pornographic magazine. And now you cannot find, and also in antiquarian bookstore, generally you don't find, especially in Italy. It is a kind of market that antiquarian dealers, they don't take seriously, that they are not interested. So where you can find, if a person wants to build an archive in the future, where this person will find this material? This choice of eBay is a very, I think that will put in danger our history. I don't know if something can be done, if only a sort of protest could be useful, but I think that we have to try maybe to do something. Maybe it is not useful, but just to try, I think it is important, because it's absurd, really absurd.
And if I could just jump in for a moment, the challenge with eBay and with protests around it is that they're reacting to a law passed by the federal government of the United States that's supposed to put a stop to sex trafficking. And of course, it was passed under the Republicans and under Donald Trump. And it's written in such a vague way that many commercial providers online are terrified of federal prosecution for offering any kind of sexually related services. So eBay is chickening out and just saying, well, we'll get rid of all of this stuff. At the same time, what I can say is that having been involved in collecting these kinds of materials for 45 years now, well, let's remind ourselves, our resilience and the practices we used before a brief window opened of easily getting online all the time and going shopping for this material, we still have the old school methods of contacting and building networks with LGBTQ elders and encouraging them to provide their materials to archives, of working with antiquarian and used dealers. And in most countries, there are at least a few dealers who specialize in exactly the kind of stuff nobody else will sell. Certainly in the US, there are a few of us. In France, there are a few. In Germany, there are a few. Time to cultivate some in Italy. And those materials, that they're offered those materials, but dealers will only buy them if they know they have someone to sell them to. And so it's up to those of us who are potential customers to let dealers know, if you ever see something like this, I want to buy it. So please go ahead and acquire it. And often it's in dealers who are outside of the more traditional book dealing world. So vintage paper dealers, used postcard dealers, the very lowest end of the antiquarian dealing market, that's where we'll find this kind of material sneaking along. So my basic exhortation is that we have the courage to say, we will not let eBay prevent us from finding this material, even if they're making it harder to do so.
You are absolutely right, Gerard. And I think that in Italy, we need, as you say, that in the USA, in France, in Germany, there are booksellers that are specialized or that have a lot of this kind of material. In Italy, less. There is less attention. It is more difficult to find this material from antiquarian bookseller, or also if you go at antiquarian markets, it is quite difficult. There is not, I don't know if it is a sort of phobic against this material, or if they think that they don't earn money. They think that it is a too small market, and so they don't take attention. But it is very difficult in Italy to find this sort of magazine, this sort of materials. For me, in 20 years, the good way to find material was by private, by activists, old activists. Sometimes I have to say on eBay, less on bookseller. So I wish in the future in Italy also bookseller will have more attention on this subject.
Sorry, if I can say something
Sara,
about that, only a little thing. I think it's a problem also of visibility and self-censorship, because old people, young people also naturally, but old people, they are not so visible as homosexual, transsexual, lesbian people. So I think, for example, me and Luca, some years ago, we saved a private collection, a private library. It was, if I remember, 700 books from a man in the north of Italy. He died without leaving nephews. No, he had a nephew, but he didn't want to remember the story, maybe. So if you wanna cancel the story of your relative, you throw away everything, or you sell what you can sell. For example, we received a donation some years ago from the sister of a teacher that died, a university teacher, and she discovered her brother was homosexual, finding hidden in a library a lot of books, every one of them in English, and every very new books, almost never open. And she was surprised, but she decided not to destroy, and she found a way to our library. So you can be lucky sometimes, but it's really difficult. I think it's really difficult for people to be visible, to be open. We must not forget that. I think we must not forget that. So sorry for this short.
Thank you. I'd like to propose a last question, both here in the audience and or online. Is there anybody who has urgent questions or something that they just can't let go of? Yoka.
Yeah, I have a very predictable question, I think.
I might have to, we can give the microphone to you. Is that all right?
I have a very predictable question. Is it working?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I just wonder, what is the influence of virtuality? I mean, what we see here and what we saw in all these beautiful collections is printed matter. And I wonder what the consequences of the fact that there's so much virtual communication and not a material part which is distributed. And like in the world, like printers disappear, all kinds of printers disappear. So what is the consequence for your archive, for example?
You mean the danger that the paper cannot be?
Yeah, it's a bit of old.
When the future is virtual.
Virtual communication.
Yeah. No, so no longer flyers, no
Like
matches.
a Facebook event instead of a paper flyer.
Yeah, I try to take note of every kind of event I think is interesting. And I have to say, I print on paper. I print on paper because, okay, I can save also material on the PC, on the computer, but I had bad experiences in the past that some computer broke and I lost everything. So I prefer to put on paper. It is my choice, my personal choice. I know that there is the possibility to put a lot of information on a hard disk. Then you can save the hard disk in the archive, no, as a document. Anyhow, we had experiences in Italy also. I know the Italian situation, that we had a lot of interesting websites where there was a lot of material. For example, there was a website called Omofonie that was very, very interesting because there were the PDF of very old LGBT magazines, of very old materials. Then there was a problem with this website, and everything, all the work they have done disappeared. And maybe I think that they have saved something, but not all, not all. Naturally, in this case, there are the original material, not the original. These were only PDF, but it was a very useful job. And now, if people want to scan this kind of document, they have to scan again. They cannot go to this website, they can find the PDF, they have to make again. So there are a lot of issues in this case, a lot.
Can I say something about?
Sara,
I think a brand new challenge is now not brand new but new for the archives is to preserve the digital native items, because for example, every document from the story documenting the story of the association. Every one of us has an email with communication, with exchange between associations, people. This is not print, so it's really difficult because it has a lot of costs to preserve this kind of materials. So.
And if I can just jump in briefly, I'll say that this is, of course, a challenge for the entire archival profession that our small organizations and individual collectors will not solve in all likelihood. At the same time, I also want to emphasize that we live in a real physical world. And that physical things continue to exist and physical places continue to exist, that in fact print material continues to exist. So there's still an awful lot to acquire and preserve in our archives and use to tell stories and inspire people, even as a flood of digital information appears to overwhelm us. And I think as institutions, we'll follow the best practices that emerge in the major institutions like the Library of Congress or major university libraries that will solve these kinds of questions. It is, however, a reminder that those good old things and those good old pieces of paper, as long as they aren't washed away in a flood, burned up in a fire, or eaten by bugs, will still be here 500 years from now, and you won't need to migrate them to a new technology to read them. As long as we have eyes and brains and feelings, that technology, the book, the piece of paper, that technology will remain absolutely usable in its original form. No new computer, no new software, no new anything needed to do that. So those of us who like old school can be reassured that it will still be around even after all these electronic bits and twinkles unfortunately disappear.
Ratna would like to say something.
Yeah, I have the mic. I think it's also it goes in both ways. So I think archival institutions more and more also collect digital material, but I think also digital natives, like people who really grew up with the internet, or I didn't grow up with it, but I was a teenager, let's say, when I started being online and communicate a lot online. We all have experienced also the loss of old web pages and the loss of, I don't know, communities or blogs or things that, and so also people know that that the printed matter has something very special and that it does often survive longer. And I think actually for me it was when I visited an exhibition in the Van Abbe Museum, I think it was 6 years ago or something. It was about social movements, artistic initiative from the 80s. And often the only thing that was there was a kind of the things also that Luca has in his collection, like a flyer for a party or one postcard or a little zine, like very like kind of what people would consider as low material. But to see that it was just one A4 paper that survived from that time, and that through that A4 paper, we could, you know, see this history that otherwise would be gone, made, for instance, me change it. If I organize an event, or even here at Mistral, there's always at least one tiny paper handout, even if it's just like one A4 paper. So I think seeing these collections from the past also make people who do things now more aware, like, okay, maybe we have something on Zoom, maybe we, you know, we have this thing that's very virtual today also.
It's being recorded.
But maybe we should also have one, you know, handout or something physical as a portal, you know, to this history for the future. So that's, yeah.
I think if it's all right with everybody, for me, that's a very nice way to leave it. The last word was future. The whole afternoon was dedicated to the history in the past and how we preserve this and what that says about our everyday life. But what better way to end than with the word future, I would say. Sarah and Gerard, thank you very much for being here. Our audience out there online, also thank you very much for joining us. Gerard, again, thank you for getting up early over there in San Francisco. I hope the coffee helped. Yeah, what can I say? Luca also, and Andrea. We're going to stay here for a little bit longer for those of you who want to have a drink. And let's see this as a way, this is a new network, a new kinship, and a new constellation of exchange. So I appreciate it very much. And until the next time.
Thank you so much. Bye.
I'm going to press the red button now. Thank you all. See you.
See you.
Bye.
Thank you.